Have you ever been in a room, maybe, I don't know, a networking event or even just meeting a friend of a friend, and you see someone who just has this almost unfair advantage?
Mm-hmm.
They seem to move through social situations with total clarity. They can, spot the tension. They understand the real agenda behind the small talk.
And they just seem to know who's trustworthy and who's putting on a show.
Exactly. Within moments. It's like this instant social instinct that just cuts right through all the noise.
It really does feel like a mystical gift, doesn't it? But the truth is, it's so much more practical, and I think far more exciting than that.
How so?
Because it's the ultimate acquired skill. I mean, think about it. In any human endeavor, managing a team, hiring the right person, a negotiation, that ability to quickly and, accurately analyze someone's character, their behavior, their unspoken intentions.
It's priceless.
It's absolutely priceless. It lets you adjust your strategy on the fly, anticipate resistance, and, communicate with an almost surgical precision.
And that's our mission today, really, to move that ability, that sort of magical insight, out of the realm of pure instinct and into the hands of someone who's highly informed. We're going to acquire this skill set. Welcome to the Strategy Sync YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. Today, we're diving deep into Patrick King's book, Read People Like a Book: How to Analyze, Understand, and Predict People's Emotions, Thoughts, Intentions, and Behaviors.
Yeah, and our core mission here is really to demystify this whole talent. The book is very clear that every person you meet is, in essence, a mystery.
A black box.
A black box, exactly. You can't truly know what's going on inside their head. But, and this is the key, you can learn to gather high-quality data from outside that box.
Their words, their tone.
Their expressions, their actions, all of it, and then you input that data into reliable, proven models of human nature. This whole process, it lets you produce the best possible guess about their true motivations and what they're likely to do next, and you can do it quickly and intelligently.
I really like that focus on best guess. We're not claiming to be mind readers.
Not at all.
We're building a coherent, working theory that's grounded in observation and data, not just, a hunch or a lucky guess. But that whole process starts with a challenge, a really big one that I think we all face.
Which is?
The deeply ingrained and often totally false belief that we're already good at this.
Ah, yes. That is the first and biggest obstacle to getting better. It's like that common observation where nearly everyone believes they're an above-average driver.
Right.
Well, the same confirmation bias applies to social intelligence. We remember the 3 times we correctly guessed a friend was upset, but we just, conveniently forget the 10 times we completely misread the room.
So we're basically just blinding ourselves with our own ego.
Exactly. The book warns that if you genuinely want to get good at reading people, you have to start with a blank slate. You have to accept that you might be far less adept than you currently think you are.
And there's data to back that up.
Right. Oh, absolutely. It cites social intelligence tests like the ones from Simon Baron-Cohen, where the average person scores something like 26 out of 36 on emotional interpretation.
So that means for every 36 emotional encounters,
10 of them are misinterpreted. That's a huge gap between our perception of our skill and the actual reality, and that's where we have to begin.
Okay, so let's say we adopt that blank slate mindset. We're ready to learn. What are the foundational rules we have to follow when we start gathering our initial data?
The first crucial mistake, the one you see everywhere in those quick internet listicles, is relying on a single isolated data point.
The classic error.
It's the classic error. You see a headline like, "This facial cue means they're lying." So you obsessively watch for one gesture, let's say the person rubbing their nose, and you immediately conclude, aha, deception.
But what if they just have allergies? Or the lighting is weird?
Exactly. The first core principle is simple, but it is absolutely essential. Context matters. A single behavior in total isolation is meaningless.
Can you give us a really powerful example of that context shift?
Sure. Think of a job candidate. They're talking fast, they're stumbling over their words, maybe their palms are sweaty, and they're sitting right on the edge of their chair.
Okay, very tense.
Right. If you saw that in a casual coffee shop chat, you might accurately label them as extremely nervous, insecure, maybe even hiding something. But the context is a high-stakes, pressure cooker interview.
Where everyone is nervous.
Everyone is nervous there. That behavior only becomes truly significant if it's a major deviation from the established norm for that situation, or if it continues after the pressure is removed.
And that context has to include a cultural lens, too.
Mm-hmm.
Our interpretation of a cue can be completely wrong if we just assume it's universal.
Oh, absolutely. The book notes that in Western cultures, especially here in America, maintaining strong, steady eye contact is seen as a sign of honesty, confidence.
Sincerity.
Right, if you avert your gaze, it feels suspicious. But then you contrast that with certain Eastern cultures, like in Japan, where that same intense, sustained eye contact can be seen as profoundly disrespectful, intrusive, or even aggressive.
So if you read someone from that background through your own cultural lens,
You'll draw a fundamentally incorrect conclusion about their character every single time.
which leads us directly to the second principle, which really builds on that need for context.
Yeah.
We must establish a baseline.
This is probably the most underrated part of reading people accurately. You have to know what someone is like normally before you can detect any kind of significant deviance from that norm.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine you meet a new colleague. They greet you with a huge smile, make extended eye contact, compliment your outfit, maybe even give your shoulder a friendly squeeze.
My initial thought might be, wow, they really like me. Or maybe even, are they flirting?
Exactly, that's your uncontextualized theory. But then you watch them, you see them interact with 5 other people in the office.
And they do the exact same thing with everyone.
The exact same thing, the same smiles, same compliments, same casual touch. You realize that behavior isn't about you at all. It's just their normal, gregarious, highly extroverted baseline.
So those observations stop being data points about me, and they just become data points about their personality type.
Precisely. You need a deviation from that norm to draw any accurate interpretation about a shift in their emotional state or their intentions toward you.
Okay, so respect context, establish a baseline.
Yeah.
And now we get to what I think is the most challenging, but maybe the most valuable principle,
Which is,
that the key to reading other people is first understanding ourselves.
know thyself. This is the final, and you're right, arguably the most important principle. We have to understand our own emotional baggage, our recent history, our ingrained assumptions, our fears, our vulnerabilities.
Because if we don't, we just project all that stuff onto the person in front of us.
You do. And it completely corrupts the reading process. Let's say you were recently betrayed by a close friend. You walk into your next interaction, say with a new colleague, and you're carrying all this intense, unresolved paranoia and suspicion.
Okay.
So when that new colleague hesitates for a moment, or maybe touches their face, you instantly conclude, aha, they're lying to me too.
But that conclusion isn't about them at all.
Not at all. It's a reflection of the emotional weight you brought into the room. Achieving objectivity, which is the whole goal here, means you first have to neutralize your own biases. You have to understand your role in the interaction before you can ever hope to accurately assess anyone else's.
That sets the stage perfectly. We've got the foundational rules for gathering high-quality contextual data. So now let's shift our focus from what people are doing to the deep, underlying why behind their actions.
Decoding motivation.
Exactly. The book is really clear that motivation is the core driver of behavior. Without some kind of explanatory model, behavior is just meaningless noise.
Right. We need these deep psychological lenses to look past the surface actions. And we're not looking for one single definitive answer. We're looking for converging evidence across a few different, really powerful models. Let's start with the deepest, most unconscious layer, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow.
The shadow. So this is all the disowned, ignored, or hidden parts of our nature, right? Our pettiness, our rage, our deep-seated fears, our vanity.
All the parts we try to keep out of our conscious awareness because they just don't fit with our self-image.
And this model is governed by what the book calls the duality principle.
Yes, the idea that human nature, like yin and yang, is a blend of complementary forces. So if you aggressively deny or suppress one part of yourself, if you force it down into the shadow, that energy doesn't just disappear.
It's still there.
It's still there in your unconscious, and it takes a tremendous amount of energy to keep it submerged. The book uses the metaphor of holding a beach ball underwater. Eventually, that energy is going to demand expression.
We see this all the time with major life shifts. The example of the repressed student is a great one.
It is. Think of someone raised in a super strict environment where only structure, academics, and obedience were valued. They develop this perfect public persona. Neat, compliant, totally focused.
But in doing so, they had to violently suppress every impulse to be spontaneous or rebellious or expressive.
And all that repressed energy becomes their shadow. So the moment they leave home and that external structure is removed, what happens?
It erupts. They go wild.
They go wild. Not because they're fundamentally bad people, but because they have this enormous backlog of denied, primal, youthful energy that is just demanding to be released.
So as observers, our strategy is to infer the hidden opposite by looking at the surface behavior. The more extreme the surface action,
The more extreme the repressed opposite has to be.
exactly.
You see the outward aggression of a bully, the cruelty, the need to put others down, what must be in their shadow.
Intense feelings of weakness, inferiority, crippling fear.
Right. If you see their aggression as just the external armor protecting that inner core of self-doubt, you gain this enormous insight into their behavior. The same applies to the overtly arrogant narcissistic person. Their grandiosity is a brittle defense.
So their shadow is probably filled with self-hate, deep shame, and this overwhelming fear of being exposed as just ordinary.
You got it. And if you recognize that their arrogance is just defensive armor, it completely changes how you can interact with them. You resist that urge to meet their aggression with your own.
It lets you bypass the armor.
It does. If you challenge an arrogant person directly, you'll only strengthen their defenses. But if you recognize their underlying motivation is avoiding shame, you can often get better results by, say, appealing to their competence or their high status. You maintain their ego defense while still guiding them toward your objective.
Now this is maybe the most actionable part of the shadow concept for me.
Yeah.
Shadow projection. This is the key to understanding why people criticize us in the way they do.
Projection is how the ego relieves the pain of its own disowned traits. It just attributes them to the outside world. Let's take that coworker who is constantly criticizing your ideas as unprofessional or naive.
Okay.
It's highly likely that deep down they feel naive, or they're terrified of being exposed as unprofessional. They're relieving their own inner discomfort by placing that unwanted trait onto you. The moment they call you naive, they have told you something profound about themselves.
That's a powerful reframe. It means the criticism isn't really about me, it's about their internal conflict. But the shadow dynamic is contagious, isn't it?
Yeah.
How does someone else's shadow trigger our own?
It is. So if that coworker calls your idea naive and you suddenly feel this intense, disproportionate spike of anger or shame,
That's the trigger.
that's the trigger working. That unwanted feeling, that naive label, was probably already sitting unresolved in your own shadow. The insult just touched a raw nerve and it caused a painful emotional resonance. If you aren't aware of your own defensiveness, you get immediately hooked into an argument and you completely miss the fact that the person in front of you just handed you a map of their own subconscious.
Shifting just a little, let's look at the inner child model. It feels related to the unconscious, but it offers different, more easily observable clues rooted in emotional immaturity.
Right. The inner child is that unconscious part of us representing the psychological state of the child we once were. It's where we learned which behaviors and which emotional needs were acceptable in our early environments. And the primary clue that someone is operating from this state is a disproportionate emotional response.
A tantrum.
An adult tantrum. It's that sudden, intense anger or unreasonable hurt or defensive sulking that just looks completely out of place for a grown-up.
I think we've all seen this.
Yeah.
The adult who has the physical shape of a grown-up, but psychologically they're demanding immediate gratification, or they pout when they face even mild disappointment.
And the clearest indicator that you're dealing with this dynamic is when you, the observer, feel yourself being pushed into the parent role.
Okay.
You feel like you're expected to soothe them or reassure them or take responsibility for their failure. For example, a colleague misses a crucial deadline. When the manager confronts them, they don't apologize. They get petulant, they deny responsibility, they sulk.
And they make the manager feel guilty for even bringing it up.
Exactly.
The application here is a real game changer. So how do you respond to that dynamic without falling into that parent trap?
You have to recognize the dynamic and then you have to refuse to play the parent. If the colleague is sulking, you don't engage with the sulking. You don't reprimand them. You don't console them. You just address the functional adult reality.
So you'd say something like, I understand this is frustrating, but the deadline remains firm. How do you plan to deliver the project by tomorrow morning?
Perfect. By deliberately addressing their adult rational aspect, you shift the dynamic. You force them to engage from a mature position. If you step into that parent mode, you just validate and perpetuate their childish behavior.
Okay, moving from our psychological history to more primal, immediate drives, let's talk about the pleasure or pain principle. This is the fundamental, unfiltered drive behind pretty much all of our actions.
It is. The principle says that every single decision, whether it's conscious or unconscious, comes from either seeking pleasure or actively trying to avoid pain. It's the reptile brain operating constantly right beneath the surface of our logic. And the book gives us 5 key rules that govern how this plays out in observable behavior.
Rule 1, and the most crucial for survival, is that pain avoidance is stronger than the desire for pleasure.
We are wired for survival first and foremost. The instinct to avoid death or injury will always, always override the desire for even immense pleasure. If you have a choice between avoiding a painful public argument and gaining a small professional advantage, most people will instinctively choose to avoid the argument.
The motivation from fear is just more powerful and immediate.
Vastly more powerful.
Okay, rule 2. Perceptions drive behavior, not objective reality. And our perceptions are often totally flawed.
This explains why rational people so often act against their own best interests. The book's example of the jalapeno chapulines, the chili-flavored grasshoppers, is perfect.
I'm not sure I'd try them.
See? Objectively, they're a tasty, high-protein snack. But the idea of eating an insect triggers such intense perceived repulsion pain that we recoil, regardless of the actual taste. We act based on our perception of pain, which is prone to cultural conditioning, prejudice, you name it.
Rule 3 really highlights the impact of time. We prioritize immediate pleasure or pain over distant consequences.
This is procrastination in a nutshell. A student avoiding a major paper is choosing the immediate pleasure of watching a movie over the distant, abstract pain of a bad grade in 2 months. The smoker chooses the immediate relief from a craving over the health consequences that are decades away.
The closer the consequence, the more motivational pull it has.
Exactly. The further away it is, the easier it is for our primal brain to just ignore it.
Rule 4. Emotion beats logic. This explains why rational self-control so often fails us.
The emotional brain, the id, that primal craving, it usually wins against rational thought. I mean, everyone knows smoking is bad or that yelling at your spouse is counterproductive. But when that emotional impulse hits, the craving for nicotine, the surge of anger, it's so fast and so powerful that it just overrides the slower, rational calculation of consequences.
The rational brain can lie, but the emotional brain is just reacting.
That's a great way to put it.
And finally, Rule 5. Survival overrides everything, even in our modern behaviors that seem totally unrelated.
Our primal instinct is to secure survival, which means securing energy and resources. And that desire today often manifests as the urge to eat high-calorie, fatty foods like a giant plate of nachos.
So it's not just comfort eating.
No, it's a deep-seated instruction from the oldest part of our brain. Eat when food is available, because you might be preparing for a famine that's never going to come. So the practical application here is influencing behavior. You have to reframe the pain. If a child is avoiding cleaning their room, pain, you reframe it as a fun game linked to an immediate reward, pleasure.
That's the micro level of our daily drives. Let's zoom out to the macro level of human existence with Maslow's pyramid of needs. This model is so essential because it shows how a person's core motivation completely shifts depending on which fundamental needs are unresolved.
And Maslow's hierarchy is rigid. You can't meaningfully focus on higher aspirations if the foundation is crumbling. If those foundational needs aren't met, all higher-level motivation is basically irrelevant.
And that foundation starts with physiological needs. Food, water, sleep, shelter, just basic survival.
Right, and once that's covered, you move up to safety needs. Motivation shifts to certainty and longevity, securing a reliable income, having stable housing, ensuring you're physically safe from harm. If someone is struggling paycheck to paycheck, their motivational energy is almost entirely consumed by these first 2 stages.
And above safety, we find love and belonging. This is the social stage. Friendship, community, intimacy, connection.
And the book really emphasizes that even if a person is perfectly safe and well-fed, if they live in isolation, they're going to suffer. They'll experience mental instability, intense loneliness. We are fundamentally social creatures, and at this stage, motivation is all about forming and maintaining those relationships.
Then we get to self-esteem,
which is confidence, self-acceptance, achievement, and earning the respect of others. A person here is driven by accomplishments, mastering skills, getting recognition from their peers. It's a delicate balance, though. True self-esteem means accepting yourself even when others reject you, but it's often achieved through that external recognition of your effort.
And at the very top, the highest level of motivation, self-actualization.
This is the pursuit of morality, creativity, purpose. living for something higher than yourself, fulfilling your unique potential. You see this with people like Bill Gates, moving away from direct business control to this massive, world-altering philanthropy. Their foundational needs are so thoroughly met that their motivation shifts to maximizing human potential and ethical action.
The practical application of this model is so critical for effective communication. The book's example of the counselor at a women's shelter illustrates this perfectly.
It really does. So you have a counselor, and a new client has just arrived after fleeing domestic violence. This client is motivated solely by safety and physiological needs. They need a meal, a clean bed, and the certainty that their abuser can't find them.
So giving them a self-esteem workbook about finding inner happiness is completely useless.
It's worse than useless. Their brain literally cannot process those higher-level concepts yet.
But the woman who's been at the shelter for 6 months, who has her stability and health back, she's a different challenge.
Totally. Her motivation has shifted to love and belonging. She needs community, new friends, a social network to help reestablish a sense of normalcy. If the counselor only focuses on safety measures or on self-actualization goals, they're going to miss her core, unmet motivational drive. Reading people means assessing where they are on that pyramid, because that tells you exactly what they value and what you need to talk about to engage them effectively.
And finally, if motivation is about seeking pleasure and fulfilling needs, our last model in this section deals with the very predictable ways we shield ourselves from emotional pain: the defense of the ego.
The ego as the sensitive, armored, giant porcupine. Its chief directive is self-preservation. It has to protect the self from shame, from failure, from being exposed as wrong. And this directive leads to these predictable behavioral patterns involving what the book calls mass intellectual dishonesty and self-deception.
Which means the ego doesn't care about objective facts. It only cares about constructing a rationalized justification that then becomes that person's reality.
Exactly. You see this in the workplace all the time. The employee who consistently fails to meet targets won't admit to poor skills. The ego creates a new narrative. The boss has always hated me, or the metrics themselves are flawed.
The example of Fred, the pop star fan, is brilliant. He insists his guilty idol is innocent.
Right. Not because of the evidence, but because his entire identity is wrapped up in that fandom. Admitting the idol is flawed would mean he has to admit he was wrong, which is a blow the ego just cannot permit.
Well, let's break down the specific defense mechanisms identified by Anna Freud, because these are the precise behaviors we can actually see when an ego is under threat. First, the most straightforward and often the most dangerous one: denial.
Denial is literally refusing to acknowledge a negative reality. You just claim a negative fact as false. That internal report ranking my performance in the bottom 10% is wrong. The computer must have calculated the scores incorrectly. You just act as if the problem doesn't exist. It's so dangerous because it prevents any effort toward fixing the problem.
Next is rationalization, the classic art of the excuse.
This is where we explain away something negative, making it seem like the bad outcome was unavoidable due to external factors. It's the sour grapes mechanism. I failed the driving test, but it's not because I drove badly. It's because the road conditions were uniquely bad. Or, my hand-eye coordination is uniquely disadvantaged. The ego ensures the failure is always outside the self.
How is repression different from denial? They seem pretty similar.
Denial is a conscious rejection of a fact. You know the house is on fire, but you claim it isn't. Repression is pushing painful thoughts or feelings entirely out of your conscious awareness. The mind literally walls off the experience, making the emotion seem as though it never even existed. An adult might repress a painful memory of childhood abuse until it's completely absent from their conscious recall, even though it's still affecting their behavior.
And when the true source of an emotion is too threatening to deal with, we see displacement.
The classic example is the man who hates his job and resents his boss, but he can't express that anger for fear of getting fired. So that unacceptable resentment gets displaced onto a safer target. He goes home and yells at his kids or kicks the dog. The emotion is real, but the target has been switched.
And the chaos caused by projection.
Projection is taking an unwanted feeling or flaw that's actually inside you and attributing it to someone else. The cheating spouse accuses their partner of infidelity. The overly anxious colleague accuses their manager of micromanaging. They're seeing their own flaws reflected in the behavior of others.
We also have reaction formation, which is claiming the exact opposite of the threatening truth.
This is a radical defense. The person who is secretly terrified of flying might become an aggressive advocate for the safety of air travel. The terrified cancer patient might preach about being fearless in the face of death. They're overcompensating, putting on this powerful display of the opposite trait to convince themselves and everyone else that the threatening truth doesn't exist within them.
And the very visible behavioral shift of regression.
That's reverting to immature or childish behavior when you're under extreme stress. The high-powered executive having a full-blown tantrum or pouting when they're facing a major financial audit, it's an unconscious retreat to a time when they felt safer and less responsible.
And finally, sublimation.
This is probably the most adaptive defense mechanism. It's channeling an unacceptable or painful emotion into a different, more socially acceptable outlet. Intense loneliness might be channeled into highly dedicated charity work. Intense anxiety could be turned into relentless exercise. It lets the person cope without directly confronting the source emotion, and it often leads to very productive results.
So by analyzing these highly predictable defense mechanisms, we gain this profound insight into what a person is unable to deal with, what they value, and how they see their own weaknesses, even when they're actively deceiving themselves.
Okay, now that we've established all these internal motivations and psychological frameworks, let's shift our focus to the external observable data. We're moving from the why to the what, specifically nonverbal communication. You've heard the statistic that only about 7% of communication is verbal?
Right. 38% is tone, and a massive 55% is body language.
Meaning what people consciously choose to say is often the least reliable indicator of how they truly feel. Let's start with the face, the most expressive part of the body, and specifically Paul Ekman's work on microexpressions.
These are the fleeting, involuntary muscle contractions that flash across the face, lasting less than a third of a second.
Exactly. And they are extremely difficult to fake or suppress because they're purely physiological. It's the involuntary emotional part of the brain, momentarily overriding the slower, deliberate, conscious part of the brain. They're a true emotional leak.
And these leaks reveal the hidden emotional state, often one the person is actively trying to hide. Ekman identified 6 universal emotions. Can we go into more detail on what those specific cues look like?
Absolutely. Happiness is that famous Duchenne smile. It involves the lifted cheeks, the raised mouth corners, and those wrinkles that appear not just around the mouth, but at the outer corners of the eyes. A fake smile rarely reaches the eyes.
And sadness.
Sadness is visible in the drooping outer corners of the eyes and lips, and the eyebrows often form a distinct triangle shape in the middle.
Disgust is a very recognizable one.
Oh yeah. Disgust involves lifting the upper lip, which creates wrinkles above the lip and often on the forehead, and the eyes narrow almost into a squint. Anger is signaled by lowered, tensed eyebrows angled sharply downward, giving you that furrowed brow. The eyes tighten, and the lips are either aggressively pursed or held stiffly open, giving a piercing stare.
And the 2 final high arousal emotions, fear and surprise.
Right. Fear involves upward muscle contractions, which makes the eyes go wide because the upper and lower eyelids are lifted, and the mouth becomes tense and is often stretched horizontally. Surprise or shock is similar, but it involves the brows elevating and rounding, lifted upper eyelids, and often a loose, downward stretching jaw. The key difference is often the mouth tension fear is tense, surprise is often slack.
These cues require really intense observation. But if we do spot an expression, how can we quickly gauge if it's authentic?
Always look for asymmetry. Genuine, deeply felt emotion is typically symmetrical. The muscles on both sides of the face contract uniformly. If an expression, especially a smile or a frown, is forced or faked, it tends to be asymmetrical. You'll see greater muscle activity on one side of the face than the other. If you see asymmetry, you're probably looking at an emotion that is being consciously produced, not spontaneously felt.
Okay, so moving beyond the face to the entire body, we get into body talk, popularized by Joe Navarro, who emphasized that nonverbal communication is biological and spontaneous, driven by the limbic brain.
Right, the intellectual prefrontal cortex, the part that does complex thought, is perfectly capable of constructing a lie. But the limbic brain, that emotional primitive system, operates purely on safety and instinct. It's the honest part of the body. When the mind says one thing, the body, driven by that primal system, often says another through these subtle shifts.
Let's look at the classic evolutionary fear responses that manifest in the body: fight, flight, and freeze.
The freeze response is that ancient mechanism to avoid being detected. In a social setting, this looks like sudden immobility, locking your legs around a chair, holding a fixed position, minimizing all physical movement like deer caught in headlights. The body has just shut down, hoping the threat will pass.
The flight response is the attempt to escape.
This is the unconscious desire to create distance or find an exit. The person might physically lean their torso away from a challenging questioner, or angle their chair or their limbs toward the nearest exit, or they might unconsciously place a barrier, a handbag, a laptop on their lap as a form of physical defense.
And
This is aggressive, threatening body language, leaning forward invasively, pointing, verbal sparring, or adopting dominant postures designed to assert control and ward off an attack.
if someone isn't actively fighting or fleeing, they often engage in what are called pacifying behaviors, these unconscious attempts to self-soothe stress or discomfort. What should we be looking for there?
They're generally seeking relief in vulnerable areas. So look for repetitive touching of the neck, which is a highly vulnerable area, or the suprasternal notch, that little dip between the collarbones. Men often fidget intensely with their ties or collars right there. Another common one is self-contact, rubbing their own arms or shoulders, cradling their body. This is the body trying to replicate the comforting touch of a parent, signaling that they feel threatened or overwhelmed.
And what about some of those common, seemingly random gestures?
An unexpected yawn, especially when the person isn't tired, is often the body trying to draw more oxygen to the brain during a period of high stress. Another sign of inner tension is ventilating, which is pulling the shirt collar away from the neck or aggressively tossing hair back, as if they are internally overheating. And we often see subtle leg cleansing, where the person brushes their palms down their thighs. It's an unconscious, soothing motion that's often missed if they're sitting behind a desk.
Beyond soothing, how does the body communicate intent through protection and dominance?
Protection involves closing the body off, crossing the arms tightly across the chest, slumping the shoulders, keeping limbs close to the torso, and tightly locking the legs or ankles. These are universal blocking gestures. They signal guardedness and a desire to ward off scrutiny.
And dominance is the exact opposite.
Exactly. Wide, expansive gestures, taking up maximum space, standing with arms akimbo, hands on hips, or using that hand steepling gesture, which communicates poise, certainty, and a lack of fear.
And what about the often overlooked feet and legs?
They are tremendously honest because we don't consciously regulate them as much as our hands or face. Happy feet jiggling or bouncy legs signal high energy, which could be excitement or nervous tension depending on the context. But the most telling cue is foot direction. Our feet point toward where we unconsciously want to go. If they like the conversation, their feet will point toward you. If they want to leave, their feet will angle toward the nearest exit.
The ultimate skill, then, isn't just spotting a single twitch, but synthesizing multiple cues into what the book calls message clusters.
Absolutely. The body has to be read as a coherent whole. A single cue is a clue. A cluster is evidence. If a person is feeling hostile, that emotion will be visible everywhere in their facial microexpressions, their aggressive words, their tightened tone, and their constricted or invading posture. We look at 4 general cluster patterns.
First, the aggressive cluster.
Confronting, invasive, sudden, highly targeted gestures. The body is often clenched, leaning in, focused on a single point of attack. Second, the assertive cluster is forceful but not invasive. It's a balanced, firm, open stance. The voice is steady and the person takes up room confidently without threatening.
Third, the submissive cluster.
This involves lowering gestures, making themselves seem smaller, excessive smiling to appear non-threatening, quiet speech, and a highly vulnerable stance. Finally, the most complex one, the deceptive tense cluster. This tension is caused by that internal conflict, the mind saying one thing while the emotional brain believes another. So you're looking for anxiety, closed body language, distraction, and an overall highly controlled, stiff physical effect as they try to manage all the signals that are leaking out.
So when we're analyzing the body as a whole, the question is really simple. Is the body expanding or constricting?
That's the quickest summary. Is there physical energy moving outward? Is it open, dominant, relaxed, friendly? Or is it moving inward? Is it fearful, threatened, controlled, constricted? If you can ignore the words for a moment and just focus on that physical energy gradient, you'll get an immediate wealth of reliable, nonverbal data.
We've covered immediate body data and internal situational motivations. Now we have to integrate all of this into the biggest context of all. Persistent behavioral patterns, or what we call personality science. Knowing someone's long-term pattern gives us the framework to correctly interpret a momentary action.
That's the key. If a person is normally abrasive, their moment of rudeness today is just typical behavior. But if they're normally sweet, that same moment of rudeness is a massive data point signaling distress. We should start with the most widely accepted scientific model. The Big 5 personality traits, remembered with the acronym OCEAN.
OS is for openness to experience.
This is a measure of intellectual curiosity, imagination, and a willingness to seek out variety. High openness correlates with creativity, adaptability, and often leadership. Think of how Steve Jobs' decision to audit a calligraphy class in college, a highly open move, led directly to the beautiful typography on the Mac years later. Low openness means preferring stability, continuity, and practical, sensible approaches.
C is conscientiousness. This is the capacity for impulse control and focusing on goals.
Right. High conscientiousness means being cautious, detail-oriented, planning, and having strong impulse control. These are the people who tend to live longer and are overwhelmingly linked to job success. Low conscientiousness means being impulsive, disorganized, prone to procrastination, and having a weaker ability to control their behavior for long-term goals.
E is extroversion, the sort and direction of a person's energy.
High extroverts are outgoing, they draw energy from social interactions, and they seek the center of attention. Low extroverts, or introverts, prefer solitude and draw their energy from internal thought. It's not about shyness, it's just about where they recharge their batteries.
A is agreeableness, the measure of cooperation and empathy.
Highly agreeable people are kind, sympathetic, empathetic, and driven to help others. They avoid cruelty. Low agreeableness means taking less interest in others' problems, being content to go it alone, and often being perceived as blunt or offensive.
And there's a really useful nuance here. High agreeableness isn't always purely altruistic.
That's a key insight. Sometimes high agreeableness is driven not by pure empathy, but by a deep fear of confrontation. They agree just to keep the peace and avoid social discomfort, which can lead to resentment if they're not careful. That low agreeableness person, who might seem rude, is often just more direct and conflict tolerant.
And N is neuroticism, the core measure of emotional stability.
High neuroticism correlates with emotional instability, worrying excessively, being prone to stress and anxiety. Low neuroticism means being emotionally stable and level-headed. But anxiety isn't always bad. High neuroticism combined with high conscientiousness often results in extremely high-achieving people who worry just enough about failure to stay constantly prepared.
This model immediately provides critical context. If you're presenting a risky new idea to a business partner who you know is low in both agreeableness and openness, you can predict their response.
Their immediate negative reaction, the scowl, the crossed arms, the blunt critique, is business as usual. It's a reflection of their personality, not a personal rejection of you. So you adjust your strategy and you focus purely on objective, risk-mitigated data.
Moving on to another useful framework, let's briefly look at the 4 dichotomies of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI. Even with its shortcomings, the dichotomies offer great quick assessment tools.
Right. We've covered extroversion versus introversion. Let's focus on sensing S versus intuition N, which is how people perceive information.
So sensing types rely on concrete, tangible, immediate data from the 5 senses. They're experience-based, focused on practical details.
Think of an accountant or a police officer who relies purely on measurable facts. Intuition types, on the other hand, rely on internal intuition, connecting abstract patterns, that gut feeling. They look at the context, the theory, the bigger picture, like a lawyer or a theorist looking for the hidden meaning.
And the third dichotomy, thinking T versus feeling, F, governs how we make decisions.
Yeah. Thinking types use objective logic, rules, and reason. They prioritize fairness and consistency. Feeling types use emotion, values, and the heart. They prioritize harmony and the personal impact. The classic example: a thinking type buys a home based on resale value. A feeling type buys it based on an emotional connection to the neighborhood.
The final one is judging J versus perceiving P, how they implement information.
Judging types seek order, structure, and stick rigidly to plans. They like things to be settled. Perceiving types seek improvisation, spontaneity, and keep their options open. They often see organization as a limitation on their freedom.
Because MBTI can be a bit too rigid, let's look at Kiersey's temperaments, which organizes those 16 types into 4 broader, more useful interaction patterns.
These provide high-level context for interaction styles. First, the guardian, sensing plus judger. Their core need is to belong, and they're driven by duty and responsibility. Their strength is logistics and organization.
Second, the artisan, sensing plus perceiver.
These people live freely, seek stimulation, and are highly adaptable. Their strength is tactics, problem-solving, and agility. Kiersey estimated that these 2, guardian and artisan, make up about 80% of the population. They are the practical doers.
Third is the idealist, intuitive plus feeler.
They seek significance, meaning, and personal growth. Their strength is diplomacy, unification, and inspiring others. They are the advocates and mentors driven by human potential.
And finally, the rational, intuitive plus thinker.
Driven by the need to increase knowledge and competence. Their strength is strategy, logical investigation, and conceptualization. They're the engineers and coordinators.
The power of these models is in their application. If you have a negotiation coming up and you assess your counterparty is a rational type,
Yeah.
to lead with objective data and rigorous logic.
But if you're negotiating with an idealist, you appeal to the long-term benefit for the community or the ethical outcome of the deal. You adjust your pitch based on their established, predictable motivation pattern.
We should also briefly touch on the Enneagram to add one final layer, moving beyond just behavioral traits to our internal compulsions. The Enneagram is so useful because it focuses on the how and why behind our actions, often forcing us to face our fundamental character flaws.
Right. Instead of listing all 9 types, let's just focus on one that provides a surprising insight into common workplace behavior. The achiever, type 3.
Their core motivation is the intense desire to feel valuable and worthwhile, often through visible success and constant praise.
And their core flaw, their shadow, is vanity and narcissism, a deep-seated fear of being seen as worthless. So if you observe someone who is obsessively focused on titles, external accolades, and constantly seeking validation, you realize their motivation isn't mastery, it's the desperate need for affirmation, driven by that core fear of worthlessness.
Or consider the loyalist, type 6. Their core motivation is finding security and support, leading to intense loyalty.
But their core flaw is anxiety and paranoia. Under stress, they become suspicious and look for hidden threats. Observing a highly successful but perpetually anxious individual lets you understand that their excellent planning is driven not just by conscientiousness, but by a deeper, anxious compulsion to anticipate every possible disaster.
So the overall synthesis is treating these models, Big Five, MBTI, Enneagram, as ongoing, testable hypotheses. They provide a stable framework for predicting behavior, allowing us to adjust our communication and strategy. The model is a highly useful simplification, but we always have to remember.
The model is never as complex as the person.
We've established motivations and long-term patterns. Now let's apply all these insights to the most challenging aspect of people reading, the strategy of deception detection.
And we have to start with that reality check. Most people, even those who swear by their intuition, are notoriously bad at spotting lies. We perform only slightly better than chance.
So we can't rely on a single static cue.
Absolutely not. The problem is that liars are aware of the common cues, fidgeting, looking away, and they can easily suppress them, especially if they have time to rehearse the lie or if they've convinced themselves their lie is justified. Relying on static observation is usually ineffective.
The book outlines 3 conditions where detection accuracy goes way up.
Right. First, you have to have a solid behavioral baseline for the person. Second, the lie needs to be spontaneous. If they haven't rehearsed, their brain struggles more. And third, the lie must have real high-stakes consequences, which drastically increases their nervousness and therefore their leakage.
So we have to reframe detection. It's not about static observation. It's a dynamic conversational strategy. We have to manage the interaction to provoke the liar into revealing themselves.
Exactly. The strategy, which is rooted in research by Dr. Ray Bull, is to control the flow of information. You start by asking broad, open-ended questions. Let the person lay out their entire narrative completely. And crucially, you have to minimize your own input and, most importantly, withhold any evidence you already have.
Why is withholding the evidence so critical?
Because the liar has to convince you without knowing which holes in their story you're already aware of. If your team member is recounting where they were during a critical project failure, let them give their full, detailed alibi. Ask them tangential questions. Only after they have fully committed to their narrative do you introduce the evidence you held back, that the friend they claim they were with was actually out of the country. You force the liar to reveal flaws in their own constructed reality.
And we need to watch the narrative style itself, the difference between truth tellers and liars.
Liars often offer a clean, highly detailed, complete account all at once because it's memorized. They stick rigidly to their script. Truth tellers, on the other hand, often jump around chronologically and are perfectly comfortable saying, "I can't remember what color shirt he was wearing." When you ask a liar an unexpected question that deviates from their script, they will visibly struggle, they'll pause awkwardly, or repeat the question to buy time.
And to really break through, we need to leverage the element of surprise and intentionally increase cognitive load.
Lying requires active fabrication, constant monitoring of the story, and managing your body language all at the same time. It taxes the brain intensely. You have to overload that system until they trip up. Ask them to recount the story in reverse chronological order. Ask rapid-fire, random, unrelated questions to pull them off their rehearsed track.
We can even introduce a small bit of deception ourselves.
You can. State something you know to be untrue, a minor lie, and just watch how they respond to it. This adds one more item to their mental juggling act. Another great method is to ask them to tell you a story you know to be true first, a simple recap of their weekend, just to establish a solid baseline of how they tell a truthful story before you introduce the high-stakes subject.
And what are the clearest signs of that cognitive overload?
You're looking for signs of high arousal, the anxiety and guilt leaking out. This causes physical tells like increased blinking, pupil dilation, speech disturbances like throat clearing, and a dramatic increase in those pacifying behaviors we discussed. Intense rubbing of the neck, rapid hand-wringing.
The fascinating sign of overload I wanted to discuss is vocal stiffness, or that emotional detachment.
This is a powerful, non-obvious tell. Because the liar is so focused on maintaining the objective facts of their story, they often can't simultaneously inject genuine emotion into it. They'll recount an emotionally significant event, like a fun holiday or a devastating accident, in a monotone, objective, or highly detached manner. Their brain is just too busy maintaining the logic to generate the appropriate feeling.
So if the emotion seems delayed or strangely timed or has an inappropriate intensity, we should investigate that. How can we test that emotional mismatch?
You asked directly about their emotions in the story. How exactly did you feel when you realized your credit card was missing? A truth teller will answer instantly, often displaying that surprise or distress right there. A liar will hesitate or offer an overly simplistic, vague emotional display. You're looking for the conflict between their words and their actual emotional state.
Any final quick tips for improving detection accuracy?
Listen for people who protest too much. Liars often use excessive words, speaking quicker to sound more convincing. Watch for sudden shifts in conversational style. If a normally chatty person suddenly becomes quiet and concise when you ask one specific question, that shift is a massive indicator of tension. And always be suspicious of a sudden surge of anger or swearing that's used to avoid answering a difficult question directly.
Our models so far have required either a long-term assessment or a high-stakes conversation. Let's finish by discussing how we can gather high-quality data from minimal information and just purely passive observation, using the power of thin slicing.
Thin slicing is that ability to find accurate patterns and predict behavior using only small amounts of data, the first 5 minutes of an interaction, for example. The studies cited in the book are really striking.
Like John Gottman, who could predict if a newly married couple would stay together with 95% accuracy after watching them interact for just a few minutes.
Exactly. And remarkably, when he observed them for longer, his accuracy actually dropped slightly. This highlights the power of our intuition, that subconscious pattern recognition that feeds our gut feeling.
So we shouldn't just dismiss that initial gut feeling we get about a person.
No, we have to respect it, but we can't surrender to it. The best approach is combining intuition with conscious analysis. If you feel off about a new colleague, use that intuition not as a final conclusion, but as a guide to start a deliberate, conscious investigation. That gut feeling tells you where to start looking for objective data to either challenge or confirm your first impression.
Next, let's look at passive data collection, starting with analyzing word choice, or psycholinguistics. The language a person uses is an unconscious expression of their deeper values and personality.
And research has confirmed clear correlations. Neurotic people, for instance, use more extreme, harsh language. They don't just dislike something, they're sick of it or they hate it. Agreeable people use more positive emotion words. And interestingly, extroverts use more personal pronouns, I, me, mine, because they're focused on their actions and thoughts in the external world.
And there are specific deception clues in word choice we didn't cover in the strategy section.
Right. Liars use more words overall, trying to fill silence with details. They tend to use more sense words. I saw the report, I felt the heat, to make the story more vivid. And crucially, they use fewer personal pronouns, maybe to unconsciously distance themselves from the action. They also avoid complex causal terms like because of why, as those logical links are really difficult to fabricate on the fly.
And beyond deception, word choice reveals identity. Overusing complex jargon in the wrong setting can signal a desperation to be seen as smart.
Absolutely. And you should pay attention to their frame of reference. If someone uses business terminology to describe their family relationships, it signals an underlying transactional or competitive view of family life. If a person constantly refers to their team as we, even when discussing their individual accomplishments, they might be trying to create solidarity to mask an insecurity about their solo contribution. Language choice is constantly revealing their self-perception.
Finally, let's look at the classic Sherlock Holmes method reading physical appearance and possessions. What can a single photograph tell us about someone's happiness?
A lot about their baseline emotional state. The distinction between a genuine Duchenne smile and a forced Pan Am smile is key. The Duchenne smile involves the entire face, crinkling the eyes. The Pan Am smile only uses the mouth. Longitudinal studies of college yearbooks found that people who had genuine smiles in their photos were happier and healthier years later, which suggests the ability to genuinely express positive emotion is deeply tied to our well-being.
We can also read a person's identity and status from their clothing.
Clothing is a conscious identity claim. It communicates everything from status and wealth to occupation and personality, and context is everything. Fine jewelry in a construction zone signals different priorities than the same jewelry at a black tie event. A lack of care in grooming or disheveled dress can signal low self-esteem or even depression.
And what about the correlation with personality types?
More formal dress correlates strongly with high conscientiousness. People who frequently wear dark colors tend to score higher in neuroticism, and those who wear a lot of accessories or attention-grabbing clothing generally score higher in extroversion. If a person's attire is dominated by work clothing like always wearing scrubs, it signals their identity is deeply bound up with that occupation.
Which brings us to the final passive observation tool. Their home and possessions as extensions of their personality.
The space they live in communicates their values, status, and self-perception. Is their home highly guarded and minimalist, signaling a desire for control? Or is it open, with clear guest areas, signaling sociability? The book notes that Americans who use elaborate exterior Christmas decorations tend to be more sociable, explicitly signaling friendliness and a desire for neighborhood cohesion. Their possessions, from their car to their kitchen, are all data points revealing their underlying priorities and values. We've covered a lot of ground today, building a complete framework for analyzing that human black box. We started by analyzing unconscious motivation through models like Jung's shadow.
Right, identifying suppressed opposites, the inner child, spotting those disproportionate emotional demands.
The pleasure principle, understanding that drive to avoid pain, and Maslow's pyramid, using the hierarchy to assess which needs are currently driving behavior.
Then we shifted to gathering high-quality nonverbal data, using tools like Paul Ekman's microexpressions to spot those fleeting emotion leaks, and Joe Navarro's body clusters to analyze signs of freeze, flight, or fight, and judging if the overall physical energy is expanding or constricting.
We moved from momentary actions to persistent patterns using personality science, the Big Five, MBTI dichotomies, to build a stable, predictable framework for interpreting behavior in context.
And finally, we covered advanced application lie detection, reframing it as a strategic conversational skill. The goal is to actively increase cognitive load through unexpected questioning, forcing the liar to reveal inconsistencies in their prepared story. It's about synthesizing all this high-quality data, verbal, nonverbal, contextual, historical, to construct a flexible, coherent working theory.
And this brings us right back to that foundational paradox. We've learned that to achieve the objectivity required to read others, we first have to overcome our own biases and our own emotional baggage. The most astute students of human nature aren't the ones who master every trick for exposing the flaws in other people.
No, they're the ones who use the behavior of others, their projections, their shadows, their defense mechanisms, as a constant, unflinching mirror to better understand and ultimately improve themselves. True insight comes when you realize the person most worth reading is yourself.
That's a powerful point. If you can approach others, even the ones who triggered your discomfort, with that kind of genuine self-aware curiosity, you'll find you are reading people more accurately and with far greater compassion than you ever thought possible.
What part of your own shadow might you discover simply by paying closer attention to what irritates or frightens you in the people you encounter next week? We challenge you to use these tools for self-discovery first.